Welcome to Coast View, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, listen, I want to thank you for listening on 103.1 SuperTalk Gulf Coast, SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast, or on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast. We really appreciate it. And, I am able, as I share pretty regularly, to get numbers from Facebook about the number of people who are engaged in the show. And so the Coast View Ricky Matthews site continues to grow. Tens of thousands of people are engaged in it. And I think it's because people want to hear the positive message, and they want to hear from the lessons that they can learn from the guests that I have on this show. It's just incredible. If you look back over the last several days, I've had a string of just terrific guests. I'm fortunate to have Robbie D'Angelo, who is from Long Beach, actually, and, played at Southern Miss. He weighed over 300 pounds, and, now he's one of the most fit guys I know. He moved to St. Petersburg. He still does business here in coastal Mississippi, but he kind of changed his surroundings and raised his bar, and he continues to inspire people. And I'm lucky to have the opportunity to visit with him on the show. But we had a very, very important conversation recently about the fact that some people sort of over partake in drugs and alcohol and other things that might kind of take their sight away from living a healthy lifestyle. But if you miss that conversation, if you think you have some challenges, or someone who has challenges, I'd go to Facebook and do Coast View Robbie D'Angelo and watch that show. It was a really good show. Got a lot of good feedback about it. We're really lucky to have Robbie. I had an awesome conversation with my old friend Sharon Weeks and her daughter Shelby Brune, who own a store in a women's store in Biloxi, and we told that story. But this mother-daughter duo, Shelby's out in Los Angeles, involved in the fashion community, has her own agency, and her mother running the store here. They're partners in the store, and they're doing incredible work by staying on the cutting edge of the fashion industry. So if you missed that conversation, I'd really encourage you to go take a look at it. A couple of quotes for you, and then we'll move on to our first guest. The first one is, it really says a lot about independence. But my friend Calvin Ishii posted this, and it says, "We don't lose friends. We just learn who our real ones are." I love that one. I always said when I was a publisher, I had my work friends, and then I had my friends, the friends that were in my inner circle. And it's interesting that when you are no longer a publisher, the thing I always wondered about was the people in my inner circle. And of course, over the course of time, they never changed a bit. They were there through thick and thin, through success and failures. It was amazing. And then my work friends, not speaking, anything other than they were work friends, people that I worked with, people that I worked with in the community. I honor them greatly. But, at the end of the day, the real friends are the ones who come back to you time and time again and don't care what you do in life, except that give them a devoted friendship. And I'm really privileged to have real friends in my life. So the quote once again says, "We don't lose friends. We just learn who our real ones are." And I think that's a good lesson. And this next one is from Aristotle Onassis, and I think it actually applies well to the trials and tribulations of coastal Mississippi through so many challenges over so long. And this is, during the pandemic, we learned this as well. But here's what he said: "We must free ourselves of the hope that the sea will ever rest. We must learn to sail in high winds." Isn't that true, though? That is so true. We must free ourselves of the hope that the sea will ever rest. Of course, it's going to rest from time to time. But the reality is that to be resilient, we must learn to sail in high winds. And that's just sort of part of who we are, and it's in our DNA. And someone who really understands that, actually, is my friend Linda Hornsby, who is the executive director of the Mississippi Hotel and Lodging Association, and a really, really good friend. But we know about sailing in high winds, don't we, Linda?
We sure better. Have been tested. It might be called high winds, but it also encompasses oil spills and freshwater. I don't even call it freshwater.
Yeah.
Water intrusions and pandemics, and so a lot of them are unique to us as well.
Yeah, it is. The pain points for coastal Mississippi come in different forms, don't they? I mean, and the extent that we have the ability to be resilient with those pain points and to address those pain points, that's one of the reasons we're so strong in this community. That, one of the things you and I were talking about before we started the show was that, watching businesses of all kinds make adjustments during challenging times like the pandemic, for example, it's actually quite inspiring, really. I mean, at the end of the day, we know how to adapt. That's true, isn't it?
We sure do know how to adapt, and the pandemic was representative of that. I mean, hurricanes, adapting is like plan B. We've done it so often that there's actually a plan for it. But the pandemic was so unique. Every day was different with every set of numbers that came out and rules and don't do this, and everybody adapted to it. From the smallest property on up to the resorts.
And we'll come back to this in a second, but what you've seen, and way beyond just the hotel and lodging group, what you've seen just literally across every dimension of business in America, really, has whatever they've done to adjust their businesses. You've seen the impact. Some of that's good, some of that's not good, but you've seen the impact, and you've been able to take advantage of some opportunities that those changes have created for you. We'll come back to that in just a second. But hey, real quick, before we go any further, let's remind people what you say grace over. What is the Mississippi Hotel and Lodging Association? And tell me about your membership and so on.
Well, our membership is good. We're healthy. We're a healthy association. We're a healthy industry. And so that gives you a lot of pleasure, when you look back on every day. Looking to the future, same thing. We've got good leadership. I continue to learn every day from some of the hotel general managers, vice presidents, and so yeah, it's good. It's really good.
And it's a statewide organization that gives you the ability to sort of look into regions of the state to see if some are doing better than others. When you do that, actually, what do you see?
Well, I see, different climates at different times. For instance, Jackson, this is their busy season, especially during the week with the legislature. And so then, of course, you look at the coast, which is still a weekend destination, but becoming more of a destination that, goes beyond the weekend. And then North Mississippi. I mean, it's all different climates. And so we have to remind ourselves of that when we're speaking to a group, because what goes for one might not necessarily even relate to another group.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to Jeremy England about this on actually tomorrow. We're going to talk more about sort of how this legislative session was different. It's interesting during an election year. Legislative sessions are usually, they can actually border on boring. Mm-hmm. And I had a conversation on SuperTalk Outdoors a couple of weeks ago with Delbert Hoseman, and this has been anything but a boring session. They have literally covered the waterfront on so many different issues. They have not been shy about addressing significant issues during this session. And I bet actually what that has done is bring more people to Jackson because they, more people have been engaged.
Yeah, they have. And it's good. It's interesting to see. We mainly get our news through our lobbyists, but also just in other areas, just as you do.
Yeah, yes, no doubt. Okay, let's go back and let's think about coastal Mississippi for just a second, what the normal trends are. Usually it used to be before we had casinos, we would have 2 or 3 months of what would be our peak season, and then things would get really, really quiet in the hotel and lodging community. And then casinos came in 92 and things began to change and ramp up, and we became more of a year-round kind of destination. Certainly the summer months still serve us really well, but when you do things like cruising the coast in October and other big events like that, it really helps us generally. But the reality is that late winter, early spring is kind of a slow time generally, right?
It is, especially for family travel, because the kids are still in school. Although that is something that's changing as well with year-round school at some places. We are starting to adapt to that. Whether you adapt your rates or your availability, things like that, because some of our markets that we draw from are on year-round school, and so you measure when they're off for 2 weeks or a month.
Yeah, I've been. It's been exciting to kind of see how the market is responding. It's been awesome to see the growth in non-gaming hotels. That's always good to see, because you're seeing more family attractions starting to crop up, and et cetera. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Linda Hornsby from the Hotel and Lodging Association. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to Coast View. My friend Linda Hornsby. And, Linda and I go back a long way. She's someone I've always, so much admired for her leadership here. When I think about you, Linda, I think about someone who has stood the test of time. But it is true, isn't it?
Yeah, I never would have thought when I took this job many years ago that I would still be doing this. But it's changed so much. It's like it's a totally different job than it was. And yeah.
That's exciting. Hey, what I was saying before I went to break, but watching the number of non-gaming hotels, more of them coming, the number of attractions that are starting to open up for families. These are all things we talked about during the Governor's Commission work, that after Katrina, that we had to have hotel rooms, we had to have attractions, we needed to have a viable convention capability, we needed to have a great airport. But these are the things that sort of come together to eventually we'll reach a tier 1 status at some point. But, it takes time, but the evolution continues to move in that direction, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. And what it tells us about the non-gaming resort developments is that there's a lot of interest, and they like what the numbers, because that's what developers look at. They look at the numbers. That's what investors look at. That's all investors look at. But they look at the numbers, and if the numbers are good, they want to be a part of it. They want their share of the market.
You look at the kind of activity that's happening in Biloxi now.
Yeah.
My goodness, man, the list of businesses that are opening, and restaurants that are opening, and apartment complexes, and mixed use, and hotels that are planned. Biloxi is really on fire. And there are a lot of communities really in this moment, with inflation being where it is and all that, a lot of communities that don't have a similar story to tell. And I know that you're sort of looking at the whole state of Mississippi, but you're a Biloxi woman, and you understand, you have your heart and soul here. It is good to see, though, isn't it?
Oh gosh, it's so exciting, and it gives everybody such hope. And even if you're not from here, although, being from here and watching it, you watch a bank close, and then all of a sudden it's becoming short-term rentals and beautiful boutique hotel or short-term rentals. So you see that, but it also gives other areas hope. Well, if they did it, why can't we do it? Why can't we revitalize our downtown? So I think it serves its purpose all the way around.
Yeah, when you look at what Jordan Nico is up to, and Ivan Spinner, and a long list of others, in order to, I'm thinking about this, the Barks building coming back, and all this development happening in downtown Biloxi. But, you can have a vision, but you don't have developers that are willing to bet the ranch and put millions of dollars on the line to make these things happen. You don't have much. The good news is now we have a vision. We have, sort of this critical mass is starting to develop. You've got developers that are willing to spend the money, and that kind of feeds off of each other, creates sort of a snowball going down the hill. And I for one, am just thrilled to see it happening. I know you are too.
I am. These developers are now sharing our vision, and I mean, truly sharing it. They've got their hearts into it, not just their money. I mean, look at Ground Zero. Who would have ever thought an alleyway would lead to something like that? It's fantastic.
Linda, I saw where Bill Luckett Bill Luckett actually was the partner with Morgan Freeman on the Ground Zero Blues Club, and he passed away about a year or so ago. And they actually posted on their website out of Clarksdale that his birthday would have been celebrated in the last few days.
Uh-huh.
And I had the opportunity to have the last long form interview with Bill. We spent an hour together here on Coast View, and it was an incredible story. We talked about the blues impact in Europe and how you could go into the Ground Zero Blues Club in Clarksdale at any moment, and 50% of the people in there would not be from the U.S. I mean, they would be from other parts of the world, Norway and Australia and New Zealand and all over Europe.
Yeah.
But I had an opportunity to visit with Bill. It was such a detail. One of my favorite Coast View shows, in fact. And he talked about the opportunity to open what was really their first sort of branded foray outside of Clarksdale here in Biloxi.
Mm-hmm.
And as it continues to, I think of Bill all the time because he was so passionate, and he wanted to be. He wasn't able to be here, unfortunately, passed away before the opening, but every time I see a post of some activity happening there, some cool musician being there, and I see the pictures being posted from inside there with people enjoying themselves and whatever. What a great fit for Biloxi to have that entity there, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just like it's always been there. My son, fresh out of law school, almost went to work for Bill Luckett's law firm, and
really.
Of course, I be away from home. Not that North Mississippi is away from home, but but then he wound up going and clerking at the appeals court, so in Jackson. But he was so impressed with him.
Well, he's a special man. You can see that show, incidentally, by going to Facebook and just doing Coast View Bill Luckett. You can do the same thing at YouTube. And, for people who missed that show, I would encourage you to go take a look at it, because it's a great history of the blues scene in Mississippi and how influential it's been, and why he and Morgan, as they walked through downtown Clarksdale one day, decided they needed to do something to help sort of revitalize Clarksdale. And it actually worked out really well for them. And Morgan Freeman, of course, still is super passionate about this deal. And I know that he's probably sad every day knowing that Bill's not there with him to enjoy the fruits of their labor, but just a really good leader. But coming back to the quote that I read from Aristotle and Onassis, we must free ourselves with the hope that sea will ever rest. We must learn to sail in high winds. That statement says a lot about resiliency. And during the pandemic, we saw companies that were making significant adjustments. Some were downsizing, increasing sort of the regional impact that their employees would have. Some were using technology more. I mean, it's just a wide range of changes in businesses. And you see that well from where you're sitting as you watch the sort of what the occupancy looks like from the business community and others. You see the results of a lot of these adaptations, don't you?
Right, and you can't just look at occupancy. ADR, that's where our general managers, our hotel operators have really done a great job in gauging that and changing it. It's like it changes hourly. And rooms sold, things like that. But let me, before I don't want to let this end without telling you some great news since the last time that we spoke, is the Mississippi Sound Coalition. We are one of the parties to that suit. And we recently won in the federal court, district. And of course, there's a long way to go. Do we have the attention of the Army Corps of Engineers? A little bit. We're still not sitting at the table, but the court has said that we need a seat at the table. We, meaning the fisheries, that's who would represent us at the table. And so that this does not happen again. We cannot afford another summer of 2019. It was decimated by that.
I've had Movi Solange on to talk about it, and it was a big win in that before what was happening, I'm not saying this to you, Linda, you know it well, but for listeners who may not have been paying attention, is that this notion of when they opened the Bonnet Carré Spillway was typically done in a vacuum. They would make a decision based on flow rates of the Mississippi River. The main goal was to save New Orleans. They have the Maganzer Spillway, et cetera. And they just did it, and they didn't have to look for any input, or they didn't have to look at impact. And so, a lot of what was happening here, the algae bloom and all the impacts, the killing of dolphins and sea turtles and oyster beds and all these things.
Decisions that they make even today are 50 years. They're making a plan for 50 years ahead without people sitting at the table that need to be there. And so and then they don't change. They don't change their minds. They don't.
Well, and this is important because as we start to think about new diversion projects that are planned further down the river that would impact the Breton Sound and ultimately the Mississippi Sound, these are incredibly important conversations that we need to be involved in. The Mississippi Sound is not made. It is a semi-enclosed body of water that is pristine, that gives us such amazing seafood. It is not prepared for all this polluted fresh water to come pouring into it. It's just not. And that's what these diversion projects have done. In the case of the Bonnet Carré, flows into the Lake Pontchartrain through Lake Bourne and eventually into the Mississippi Sound. The impact of that, especially if you think about a few years ago when we had 2 openings in 1 year, I mean, it was just mass devastation. And the coalition has done great work. But as you point out, it's an important step. We have a long way to go to develop the kind of planned and coordinated effort that will minimize the impact on Mississippi Sound. But man, a positive step in that direction is the best step we can make at this stage of the game. So, hey, Linda, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.
Thank you.
You bet. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue the conversation. We'll see you after this.